So very warm welcome to everyone around the globe from Austria to our lecture series. So far, we've learned about the development, the theory, and the practice of interactive conflict resolution, and in particular of problem solving and its use in various conflicts, such as Israel-Palestine, Sri Lanka, the Alps Adriatic region, Cyprus, and others. And today we will have a closer look at the theoretical framework which is necessary to understand and conduct peace and conflict research. And we will hear also about early works of Herbert Kelman, whom we know now as one of the fathers of problem solving. And today's lecture will be given by Werner Wintersteiner, who technically was, but still is very active as professor at the University of Klagenfurt, where he founded the Center for Peace Research and Peace Education. Werner Wintersteiner's academic involvement with peace research, initially specifically with peace education, dates back to the 1980s. And he always understood himself as a scholar practitioner, which means as a scientist and an activist at the same time. So his research and his activism focus is set on peace education and global citizenship education, on peace research from the perspective of cultural studies, including literature and peace, the conceptual foundations of peace research, and the concept of the Alps Adriatic region as a peace region. Werner Wintersteiner is also a board member of the Herbert C. Kelman Institute for Interactive Conflict Transformation in Vienna, and his publication output is just enormous. Werner Wintersteiner has published 7 monographs, more than 50 edited volumes, and over 400 articles on the topics of literature didactics, German didactics, interculturality, peace education, global citizenship, and peace research in Austrian and in international journals and edited volumes. And he is published in several languages such as Basque, German, English, French, Italian, Slovenian, and Spanish. And our discussant for today's lecture will be Wilfried Graf, whom you already know as one of the 2 co-directors of the Herbert C. Kelman Institute for Interactive Conflict Transformation. Wilfried studied sociology and was for a long time working as a researcher at the Austrian Center for Peace in Schleining. And together with his co-director Gudrun Kramer, he has been engaged in conflict transformation as a consultant for various initiatives in Central Asia, in the South Caucasus, in Southeast Europe, in Sri Lanka, and in Israel-Palestine. Werner, Wilfried, we are looking forward to a very interesting event.
Thank you, dear Jürgen, for this nice introduction. Indeed, I will present you today maybe a little different face of Herb Kelman. You know him now as a specialist in conflict transformation, and definitely he has made incredible contribution to this field. But his outreach is much broader and much more important. Contributions to peace research. You will discover this today, I hope. So I will share now my screen, and I hope this works for you. And this is why I have chosen this title, A Framework for Conceptualizing Change in the World System. This is exactly a quotation of Herb. And this is what he said could be the mission of his approach to peace research, which means social psychological peace research. Definitely, he's a pioneer in peace research, and what also, I guess, was very important for his development was his background as a Jew, as an Austrian Jew who had to flee from the Nazi regime. And he always had this background of the experience of persecution and of the Shoah. And many of his family members are victims of the Shoah. But also, I guess, since he was very involved in Jewish studies, and he has also studied as a young man Jewish studies, also a Jewish approach, if I can say this, to peace research is visible in his work and in his concept. And human dignity, which was also a paper of Herbert, important paper. Human dignity is maybe the leitmotif of many of his research studies. And yeah, I would like today to make you understand maybe, let's say, 3 points. First, to understand that he has really a revolutionary approach to peace research. And I really say revolutionary because he was convinced that it is necessary to organize a fundamental change of society on a worldwide system. Secondly, you have also understood this, that he is always combining theory and practice. You can call it praxis, and this is his way to approach things. And thirdly, to understand his interactive problem-solving workshops in the framework of his whole concept and overall concept of peace research as a concept and a strategy to make changes, substantial changes in the world system. And I guess this is also our legacy we can draw from, we can learn from. I will speak about 4 points. First, to present you Herb Kelman as a pioneer in peace research. Secondly, his work, theoretical work as a social psychologist, a contribution to a general theory of international relations. And the third point, Herb as a scholar practitioner, as an agent of social change. And the fourth point goes beyond Kelman, but using Kelman, and I have identified 4 points where I will close with. Okay, let's start with the first point, Herb Kelman as a pioneer in peace research. And you see already Herb as a, let's say, relatively young man at a peace demonstration in the US. You see he always combined his militant work with his research. Pardon? Is any problem? No. Okay. Herb Kelman, as a victim of Nazi persecution, became very soon, with a young man with 15, 16 years, a human rights activist, and especially after high school, starting university studies, he was member of the Congress of Racial Equity, CORE, an important NGO in the 40s and the 50s and even the 60s. And he became familiar with Gandhian methods of nonviolence and nonviolent resistance. He was also arrested for his protest against the American nuclear tests. One of the earliest manifestations were in 1946. It was against these tests at the Bikini Island. He was recognized as a conscientious objector in the Korean War. And he told us that in 1945, when he was 18 years old, he came back from a conference in Chicago to New York, where he was based in this time, from a CORE conference. And one of the elder leaders of this conference was in the same train. And he said to him, Herb, what are your plans now? And he said, I don't know exactly. And he said, so if you want to study, please, would be a good idea to study psychology or sociology, because these are the fields that are the most relevant ones for when it comes to peace or social justice. And definitely, this was an important moment for Herb to decide, okay, I will study social psychology. You see psychology and sociology in some way mixed. And what is also remarkable, as a graduate student, always very young, he started his first activism in peace research. He wrote together with his friend Arthur Gladstone a letter to the journal American Psychologist and said, let's check and evaluate the assumption behind American foreign politics in the light of the psychological knowledge that we have. And this was a starting point for the first, maybe the first modern association for peace research called Research Exchange on the Prevention of War. And a bulletin that was also founded in the same moment in 1951. And Kenneth Boulding, which was already a very well-established scholar, was very supportive and took over this organization. You may wonder why he did not call all this peace research, but more research on conflict and conflict resolution. This was definitely the Cold War and the McCarthy era, where it was very, you became very suspicious if you speak about peace. So I think it's a little bit like today in some way, or in some countries at least, that talking about peace is already something not very well accepted by the establishment. Okay, so it's interesting that he started so early with peace research, and this is why I said he's really one of the first pioneers. If you compare with other important steps, the first association of scientists for peace, the Pugwash Conference and Pugwash Association, started a couple of years later in 1947. And in 1949, the famous PRIO, Peace Research Institute Oslo, was founded by Johan Galtung, and also by Johan Galtung's Journal of Peace Research a couple of years later. And in the same year, also, the International Peace Research Association. By the way, also John Burton was one of the founder of this IPRA, of International Peace Research Association. So you see, Herbert Kelman was really among the first ones, and he was following a very independent and different way than the European peace research, which was more or less focused on social studies and political studies. Kelman's contribution was exactly social psychology, and he said, I have 4 main research fields all of my life. The first one is, and this is not an order, but the first one is conformity and obedience. Definitely also behind this question that everybody in this time was asking, why was it possible that such a so-called cultivated people like the Germans has shown so much conformity towards the Hitler regime and has accepted it, and why was there not more resistance? Second point, nationalism and national identity. Very important, this study also for his interactive problem solving in the Middle East, of course. The same thing for ethnic conflict and its resolution. And finally, he had said very important for him is also the ethics of his own work, the ethics of social research. Yeah, I will show now some of these points following his main publications. And I start with this book, International Behavior, still a very interesting text, a book. It's an edited volume, and Herb wrote an introduction and some final remarks. And he spoke about social psychology of international relations, which he didn't want to study as a separate field, but as integrated to a general theory of international relations, because he said there are so many interactions between psychological, cultural, and political, economic factors that you have to see this action, vice versa, and reaction, and so on. This is very important. And he always said the study of social interaction requires attention to the larger societal context. And this the general cultural framework, and so on. The role of participants, which means the actors, the normative expectation and rules that govern interaction, and the action choices that are available. So I think he was, from the beginning on, somebody who was aware of complexity. And this is also the reason why in my paper, but I will not follow in this point for my paper today. In my paper, I have a subchapter on complexity, because this is very relevant to Kelman, and this is also very relevant for us, his approach to complexity. Okay, but this is for today. I think for the moment it's fine. Maybe in discussion we can find more points. The second aspect is what I have called the ethics of social research. And it's interesting that Kelman became, after different other stations, professor for social ethics at Harvard University in 1968. And at the same time, he published a book with selected texts he has written before on human values and social research, on the ethics. So I think he really took this very seriously. He said specialized knowledge is no substitute for moral indignation, nor is critical analysis a substitute for personal commitment in dissent. So you see, he was always aware that as social scientist, you have not only to be also an activist, but to contribute via your studies something unique to offer for the peace research and for the peace movement and for social change. And this is your study and your understanding of complexity of social processes. And this reminds me a little also to Edgar Morin's book, Science with Good Science, Science avec Conscience, which is in the same line, little bit later. Now to the point of obedience, and it's interesting that he has called this book The Crimes of Obedience, and he studied in this book some case studies in the 1970s in the US. There was a big issue about the My Lai massacre in Vietnam, because some American officer had done some massacres, and when they were accused, they said, this is, I simply followed the orders and I couldn't do anything other. So Herb Kelman and Lee Hamilton didn't study so much the case as such, but the reactions of the American audience to this. And it was interesting that many people, really many people, a large part of the audience was in favor of Lieutenant Kelly and these people who has committed these massacres, and said he couldn't do anything else. So this was very important for Kelman to study here this psychological mechanism, first to that led to this pretext or these arguments that they couldn't do anything else, and also to this argument of the wider audience. And he found 3 points, 3 aspects: authorizations, routinization, and dehumanization of the other, of the enemy, that helped to hide behind the order of obedience. So this was a book very important, I guess, and it's still discussed very often. It is used it was used in the Iraq War in 2004, 3, 4, 5, with this all these abuses of American soldiers. Abu Ghraib, maybe you remember, and people writing about this were referring to Herbert Kelman again, because this was such a groundbreaking work. And then the hope at the end of this book, I will read this text. With the democratization of disobedience, we dare to hope that more and more individuals will avail themselves of that right to say no, that indeed they will develop the feeling of obligation and the courage to do so. The choice to say no, as ultimately rests on our saying yes to some of the distinct qualities that makes us human: a sense of personal agency, an awareness of the consequences of our actions, and a caring attitude toward our fellow human beings. So this is the vision of this book, and I guess this is still very topical today. I would like to add to his book also a very long essay he has written only in 2007, which resumes in some way his whole life work, so far life work, as the social psychological dimensions of international conflict. And also here you see this what I call revolutionary approach when he speaks about a reversal of the social psychological processes that promote conflict through changes in the habitual ways of thinking, acting, and interacting in any given conflict, and indeed in the international system as a whole. So you see here social psychology, politics, economy, all education is all put together. And one more quotation said, focusing especially on social psychological issues, he said, with this background of social psychology, you can gain insight into the causes of change, the impact of change, and the ways of promoting change at the level of the national and international systems. Precisely because it becomes possible to approach these systemic processes from the perspective of a different level of an analysis, different to only political one. Yeah. So this leads me to my third point, to social psychology as a transformative peace research, as a really and in the same paper, you find this phrase of conceptualizing change in the world system. This was really the idea of and the hope of Kelman, and this was what he was striving to via his scientific work and via his work as an activist and as a scholar practitioner. And yeah, I will not read this in detail, but you see, this is the way he has chosen. And here, maybe in the tradition of Karl Marx and the thesis on Feuerbach, he said promoting such changes is a task of diplomacy, of education, and of institutional development. So this maybe many people think it's not possible or it's not easy, but he said the dynamic character of international conflict is also in some way a sign of hope, a hint that many things can happen if you really work for this change. So this is also what you can call, or what Kelman himself has called, his strategic optimism, an optimism which is not blind, but an optimism which says we have to systematically search for opportunities to change in the right direction. And if you don't think, and this is a kind of optimism, if you want, and you need this, and otherwise you will not be able to work for this change. And he has written just a list, if you want, of main criteria for this change. First, expanding the collective consciousness to include a shared vision of a peaceful world. So very important now when we speak about global education, for instance, and from world society or homeland earth, in the words of Edgar Morin. Redefining the criteria for group loyalty, which is a clear hint that he's still dealing with the crimes of obedience, of course. Counteracting the pressures that make militancy and aggressive posturing the politically safest course for decision makers to follow, which is always this worst case thinking, this vicious circle of security, where you always try to make your situation even more secure, which means more weapons, and the other feels, of course, menaced by this. And so the waste of armament goes on and on. And this is a next point, very important for his conflict transformation ideas, moving from zero-sum thinking to a win-win approach, creating commitments to a peaceful relationship, breaking the conflict spirals initiated by mirror images, and developing communication patterns to allow new information to challenge old assumptions. I think, to me, when I read this again, it is like as he has given us this yesterday for the ongoing conflicts and wars, and said, look at this, this is the way how we can get out. Yeah. And here again, his plea for overall global approach to conflict. Not only the military, diplomatic, political dimensions, but also economy, psychology, culture, social structural dimension. All this is important, and without discussing this, without discussing the intra-societal and inter-societal processes, we will not find a way out of conflict and war. This is, I guess, a very important point. So, and from this, it is no wonder that when he was starting his work in the Middle East, and all this work from the 1960s on and 1970s, especially in the active problem solving and his workshops, he had already a clear concept fooled by social psychology and fooled by all his studies before, that he sees conflict as a fourfold process driven by collective needs and fears, as a process that is also intersocietal, not only interstate, as a multi-phased process of mutual influence. So if you do something, if you take a step, you have to be aware that this step has maybe some outcomes that you didn't want and some perception of the other, which can maybe escalate the conflict. Yeah, and finally, he sees this as an interactive process with an escalatory self-perpetuating dynamic, which is also very dangerous and which you see in each of these conflicts today. Maybe we can discuss this later. Okay, finally, I will identify 4 points where we can use the legacy of Herbert Kelman to go some steps further, and in 4 working fields. The first one was the topic of this lecture series, the methodologies and approaches to conflict transformation with different case studies, which are in this book and which are in all these lectures before me. So I will not discuss this anymore. You know this already. But look also at other aspects. A second one is the complexity of social relations, which was very important for Herb. He always wrote about this, and he applied also his knowledge, but he didn't elaborate this as a theoretical system. Others did. And one example also discussed in the book, in my paper, in my chapter, is Dirk Leder's approach in his book Modern Social Theory, where he identifies 4 aspects: the personal, the social, the cultural, and the structural, if you want. Maybe in the discussion we can speak about this more, but I only want to say that this is also a very important point where we can explore the field and make more approaches based on Kelman, but going beyond him. The third one aspect is the scope of the transformation, which includes always the human society. Today, I guess, with all these atrocities and problems with climate change and with degradation of nature, with this killing of our planet, not the planet, but the circumstances and the preconditions for our own life. Yeah, so I think we cannot anymore discuss peace without including peace with nature, which is now very often in the discourse of the Anthropocene. And I think this is a point where we can go beyond Kelman, but still keeping many of his insights and using them. And also in my paper, I compared sometimes at some points Kelman and Edgar Morin. And Edgar Morin is one of these champions to integrate the aspect of nature into social sciences and in the idea of change, or what he called metamorphosis. Yeah, and finally, the 4th field is education. Education taking into account also the global dimension of today and planetary dimension, which means including the nature, which we call now global and planetary citizenship. And it's interesting that while this discourse now is very popular and it's also promoted by the UN and promoted by many NGOs and scholars, that Herbert Kelman has already written in 1968 a paper, Education for the Concept of a Global Society. So in some way, he was also a pioneer in this field, and I learned a lot also from his approach to education. And this is maybe one of the not yet really discovered dimension, that Herb Kelman was not only a wonderful teacher, which every student of him said, but he had also contributed to the idea and to the concept of education, a couple of papers and a couple of observations, and it would be a good idea to explore this path a little bit more. So this is shortly my ideas and my contribution to Herbert Kelman, and I'm happy to discuss this with us. But first, Wilfried will continue in some way. We will see what he will say. Thank you for your attention anyway.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I have the task to comment a little bit on Werner Wintersteiner's contribution, his article and his contribution now. And I will be very short because I don't know what to say, because most of the thesis and most of the content of what Werner was talking to us, I know it. We discussed it a lot together. We worked together the last 2-3 years very intensively, and our discussions are circling around all these topics: complexity theory with Edgar Morin, Herb Kelman's contribution, this is social psychological approach, and so on and so on. So I could subscribe everything what Werner here spoke to us now. I have only 3 points. They would be complementary to Werner's approach. The first point is Werner shows us the importance of Kelman's work for peace research in general. So not only for social psychology of conflict, not only social psychology of international conflict, but for international relations and for peace research in general. This, I think, is a very important discovery, because Herb was working on this from the beginning. This was his research program, integrate social psychology into international relations. Therefore, he went from his Institute of Psychology to the Department of International Relations in Harvard. And so he tried to integrate social psychology into international relations. And he has a specific approach to social psychology. Social psychology is a hybrid. There is either psychology, there is a hybrid between psychology and sociology. And you have a social psychology where psychology is first, and then comes sociology, and you have a social psychology where you have sociology first, and then comes psychology. And Herb is more, as he said to me personally, more in this tradition of social psychology, sociology first. But of course, then on the other hand, you need some, with such a program, you need some resonance from other scholars, from other disciplines, from other departments. In order, Herb wanted to see his approach, his field integrated into this more general theory of international relations. And this, of course, depends from the conditions you have on your local working space, on your department, on your university, and so on. I don't know exactly how Herb in Harvard was, what was the conditions of cooperation in Harvard between a social psychologist like Herb. You had this very famous Department of Law. They are very much also engaged in conflict resolution. Ron Fisher and his department. They were a very, very successful enterprise until now. They're a global business. And I think this was not so much cooperation between Herb and Harvard Law faculty, but more peaceful coexistence, I would say. But for example, when you look at the George Mason University and the Carter School of Conflict Resolution is the new name of this school at the George Mason University. It's financed by the Carter Foundation. They have a lot, maybe better conditions there to meet different disciplines and to start something like a transdisciplinary approach. So my first point is, based on this program of Herb, how can we organize this, such an independent process of transdisciplinary research program? You need a place for it, you need the conditions for it, you need the money for it. So the best is, of course, you find a university. And my first point is to propose this to the University of Graz, because they are very much, there is a kind of cooperation already between us, already also based now on these 3 Harvard conferences, where I was so glad that Jürgen and Bernhard and others participated from the beginning. And what came out now with this book and with this lecture series, so I would say we could really start a discussion how we could contribute to such a transdisciplinary research program. For example, for Herb, it was like, as Werner said, his focus was social interaction, the study of social interaction between individuals and groups. But then he was very eager to respect the context. In his case, the context was structure, sociology, and culture. His focus was more micro level, but his context was the macro level of structure and culture. For example, Werner would go into such a research with a focus on, I would say, education, for example, or his 4 working fields. But I would say he starts more with culture. But then he has to respect the other dimensions like psychology, social psychology, politics, and social structure. And when Jürgen would start a project, let's say, focusing on the relationship between politics and law, and this became so actual now with the International Criminal Court, with this the permanent debates about law and how to get justice via law. This is a very, 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 very important topic. It was always, but it's now also very, very, very actual, very important. So there would be a lot of some topics where we could really start a cooperation for a joint transdisciplinary approach. This would be my point 1, my first comment to Werner's contribution, and my proposal and a small proposal for the University of Graz and for the Department for Global Studies there. The second point is, again, coming back to Herb's praxeology of interactive problem solving. Werner tried to focus more on the theoretical dimensions of Herb. I'm coming back to the praxeological and the practical approach of conflict resolution, conflict transformation, and I come back to what we, meaning Oliver Fink and Gudrun Graham and myself, try to discuss in our own contribution. When it comes to his praxeology, I think his method of facilitation, his method of dialogue, that what I call the 6 levels of dialogue, are still, after all these years, I would say 40, 50 years now, are still a valid structure for organizing a creative, a transformative process of dialogue, process of communication. but the facilitation has to be connected to a quite interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary theoretical framework as well. So it's a very, very important task to link conflict transformation and complex theory in order to come to much deeper conflict analysis and maybe to more creative solutions. This would be the second point. This relationship between a quite more or less simple method for the dialogue and a very, very complex frame of reference. My point 3 is a proposal for a research question, but it's also a question to Werner and also to Max and to Jürgen maybe. This field of research is also characterized by debate, of course. And when you read Werner's article more in detail, you will find a reference to an ongoing debate about basic human needs. The human needs theory of John Burton, the basic human needs model, and so on and so on. And you will find in this article of Werner a hint to different concepts and models of human needs theories. So it starts with the model of John Burton, who was a purely psychological model of individual needs as a basis of politics. You had then the alternatives of more socio-cultural models. You had, for example, the theory of basic human needs from Johann Galtung. And you had, I would say this is the classical structuralist approach to human needs. And then you have more and more the more constructivist approaches to human needs, like Kevin Afruch, for example. And then you have Herb's approach, who I would say this is some consciously eclectical concept of human needs, where he's saying, for me, this concept is very, very broad, and it's not anchored in any particular needs theory. So this is method number 4. But I'm looking for method number 5, and also here I see in Werner's article, he's mentioning often Edgar Morin and Edgar Morin's complexity thinking, and especially his theory of the human being as a biocultural being. My question to Werner would be, what would be then this complex understanding of the human needs and of the human being based on this complex approach of Edgar Morin? Because I think with this approach, we could maybe integrate the other 3 or 4 approaches, structuralist, post-structuralist, liberal, and so on, that I can see because we need still more debate and more integrative thinking about what is our basis, our frame of reference when it comes to judging what is good, what is bad, what is right, what is wrong. We need such joint values, and we need an ongoing debate within the society of peace researchers and scholarly practitioners, especially around this topic, because it's split until now, I would say, between human rights fanatics and human needs fanatics. And they have to come together. And also here, Graz would be a perfect place to make this discussion a reality. Thank you.
May I answer to this now? Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Wilfried. I would like to start with your first remark and this integration of social psychology and international relations, and how it was in Harvard and and in the whole scientific community. We do not have to forget that even before Kelman became a professor at Harvard in 1968, he was already accepted by, I guess, the best ones of the social scientists and historians. Take simply Stanley Hoffman. He gave out edited volume Contemporary Theory in International Relations in 1960, and he included Herb Kelman. Herb Kelman has a chapter in this book because Stanley Hoffman offered him this. And Stanley Hoffman was professor at Harvard University. By the way, Stanley Hoffman was also from Vienna and Jewish background, but he survived the Second World War in France with his Jewish mother in the south of France. So for me, this is, let's say, an indicator that to a certain extent, he was really accepted already in the social science community. And of course, we know that he has got a couple of prizes and awards, not only by associations for social psychology or psychology as such, but also from IPRA, from the International Peace Research Association. He has got an award in 2008. So other social scientists have acknowledged his contributions, I guess, and his unique approach. Yeah, this is to the first point. The second one, where you said his praxeology needs also a theoretical framework. Okay, yeah, but his praxeology was also a political practice. So he did not simply do his workshops, but he was for years laying the ground for the workshops. You know this. He was one of the first Americans to talk to Arafat and to open up the doors to the Palestinian side, and to become friend of some Palestinian co-facilitators and so on. So he did a lot in this sense, and this is also, I guess, in his theoretical framework that conflict resolution or conflict transformation is an inner societal process and a process between states. And he was acting according to this insight, I guess. Yeah. Even if he didn't maybe develop a whole theory of this praxeology, his way was always action research, I guess. So a more modest way to look at things, but to look at things very closely. On the other hand, yeah, he was not that type of people to make abstract concepts and different tables with structures, how they all interact. This was not his way, definitely. Yeah. The third point, I guess it's very important, the human needs theory. You mentioned that Kelman was in this sense somebody who has chosen a very eclectic way, and this is not, I guess it's not because he couldn't decide which theory to choose, or it's not simply that he said we can take from each theory, but this is also because of his praxeology, that he was believing that, and this is in some way, if you want, a constructivist approach, that what is really human needs, you cannot decide it before. it is also in the process. Because of course everybody says, this is my need. I need this absolutely. And people are maybe not aware that they are confusing their interests with their needs. And they agreed with their needs, as Gandhi has said. Only in this interactive process of negotiating, people can become aware where is their red line, where is their point of no return, where is a moment when they can say, no, I cannot go beyond this. So this is also in this praxeology. But of course, it is at the same time important to have a concept of human needs. And I guess you're right to start with Edgar Morin and with his approach in one of his earlier books. The book is called Le Paradigme Perdu, La Nature Humaine. I guess it's not translated into English. It is translated into German with another title. But the idea, or the title in English would be The Lost Paradigm, the Human Nature. And in this book, you mentioned it already, he said, you cannot divide human beings between the natural aspect and the cultural aspect, because the very existence of us as humans and not as pre-human beings is because of the very strong connection between the cultural aspect and the biological aspect. And via culture, humans have also developed further their biology, and the biology has allowed them to develop their culture. So if you put this on a theory of human needs cannot be defined as some biological facts, but they are also biocultural. And in different cultures, there are different needs maybe, but this is also true for every human being. And this is also true for any given situation. So this maybe helps you to avoid dogmatic approaches to human needs theory. That's what I think. At least this is the point. And so
You can bring together.
Yeah.
You can then bring together social constructivist approaches and other approaches. You can bridge with this approach, I would say.
Yeah, but in some way, this is already a bridge, what Morin did, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is my modest and maybe too simple answer.
Thank you very much, Werner. Thank you for your concise and insightful presentation. And Wilfried, thank you for your enriching comments. I would now like to open the floor to all of our participants to ask questions. I see Wolfgang Benedek. A very warm welcome to you. And it seems that you will have a question. But you have to unmute your microphone, please.
This would be helpful.
Thank you. I don't need to be the first one, so I'm rather here to listen to this very interesting conversation, and I really enjoyed the presentation of Werner with his overview, and also Wilfried. That is, I think, giving proper attention to a person who has had an enormous influence and is still very important. I'm also happy to see that Graz is playing a significant role in these debates, and this is also due to Max and his work over the last years. And having been involved with peace research much earlier, and then more moved into human rights, I'm happy to see this happening. With regard to the issues at stake here. I think indeed social psychology is crucial also today, in particular when you look at some of the personalities who are handling or who are in charge of the present crisis. And I'm also agreeing that this issue of complexity needs really to be understood, the multidimensionality of it, and so on. On the other hand, the question is always the challenge of the reduction of the complexity, because if you have too many aspects, how can you get to a practical approach? And finally, I'm very, I mean, for me, it's very important to hear that Kelman was basing his approaches substantively also on human dignity. And that means in practice, for me, that human rights must have had a role, but I don't know, you didn't mention it, which role actually it did have in his work. I think that this is a dimension which we have always to look at, and where we see, for example, now in the present conflicts, how important the debates on genocide or on crimes against humanity are. Therefore, my question would be to how did the human rights approach figure in the work of Kelman? Thank you.
May I answer directly? If okay. It seems so. Yeah. Most of your comments are comments, and it's okay. But the question of human dignity, I think this is a very good point. Last week I had a talk about Kelman in the Jewish Museum in Vienna, and I focused also on human dignity, because for me, one of these most important papers he wrote to understand his own life work is on human dignity. And he said his experience as a young boy, the persecution by the Nazis, he has drawn a lesson. And this lesson is human dignity overall. You have to accept the other as an other. And I have finished with some statements. He said the dehumanization of the other is at the beginning of any genocide and of the crime of obedience, because crime of obedience has very much to do with human rights and very much with human dignity, because you are denying this human dignity. And so I think this was so important for him in his whole life, because he was one of them who said, never again, even as a little boy, he said, when he was fleeing to Antwerp, to Belgium, before he could enter the United States, he was already, it was already clear to him that you have to counteract to the Nazi regime and to any dehumanization. And this is why he speaks so much about human dignity. It is true that he didn't develop a field of human rights, and but it was his practice, and it was always behind his approach to peace. So I think it was really very, very important to him. And I would like to recommend you to read this paper on human dignity. Maybe I have the book. No, I would like to show you this book. But anyway, this is we have an edited volume on. It was also in the PowerPoint on some works of Kelman, but you find it in the internet on his homepage at Harvard. As a difference to Austria, even if you are already dead, you're a respected person at the university, and your homepage is still there. And so you can find this article on human dignity as a background to all his work and to his personal development. Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you, Maximilian. Will you go on?
Thanks, Werner. Thanks a lot for this very insightful presentation.
Only this is a book I was talking. I had it already, but I didn't see. Sorry.
No problem. Werner, what struck me most was this theory of Herb Kelman on social psychology of international relation as a kind of an integrated concept of international relations, which seems to me to be pretty much ahead of its time, as international relations already almost until a few years ago struggled with the predominance of this view of international relations consisting of black boxes, which are states more or less. Do you have any idea how this theory of Kelman was kind of received in the community, or did it at least feed into the English School of International Relations, or how is it can you give us a few insights or a few pillars of this theory? You said you didn't want to get too much into it. It obviously deals with some complexity theory elements. I would just be interested in who the actants are in these theories. Is it states, or is it individuals, or structures composed of individuals, or whatever?
At the beginning, in this book, International Behavior, which was the first one to elaborate this is an edited volume. This means that many different scholars have written about, and he has written the introduction and a final paper giving the framework for this. This was, let's say, at the beginning a little bit more general, programmatic, while the second, not a book, but the second, this long chapter in this book of Zartman's, this yellow one in the slides, there he has already 20, 30 years of experience, and it's much clearer and it's much more elaborated. But anyway, I guess also from the very beginning, Kelman is very clear that social psychology has its place, but it is not at the place of political science. And as far as I see, in political science, and especially in politics, you have dominance of politics plus individual psychology. To say, for instance, Putin is mad, or Putin, you cannot negotiate with him because he's so. Or it is typical that any leader is like this and this. So people do not see that psychology is much more than individual psychology. And Kelman very carefully from the beginning said any conflict is a conflict between states, and at the level of the states, of course, this is about politics and this is about social sciences. But at the same time, any leader is also in some way, and it's different in different societies, in some way dependent of the public opinion and of the thinking of the people. So in some way, any conflict is also an intersocietal conflict. And it's also in the same moment an intra-societal conflict. because people, you see this now, for instance, of course, in any conflict, you see how Democrats and Republicans are dealing in different ways with the war in Ukraine. But this is not simply said, they are the Democrats and they are the Republicans. Also among them are different rivalries and so on. And there are so many factors. This is a complexity also, or an aspect of complexity. And we have to study all these interactions. And so in some way, he was already, without the terminology of cybernetics, but in some way he said there are acting and counteracting and influences from outside and so on. So he was aware of this, but at the beginning in a very, let's say, theoretical way. One aspect of your question I cannot answer, but because I have not really studied in which way this was accepted, or this has fooled the debates in social sciences in any field. There are, of course, I see from time to time somebody referring to Kelman, but for a real study about this, I don't know. So I'm in last time I'm collecting ideas of new doctoral theses for about Kelman. So this would be another example. Yeah, I have already, for instance, the Jewish philosophy of conflict transformation and its influence in Kelman, for instance. And so I have a lot of ideas, but maybe this lecture series helps to find these future students. Maybe you don't know so far that you will be one of them. So this is my appeal. Yeah.
Wilfried? Unmute your mic.
Yeah. Now?
Mm-hmm.
No, I think it's a very interesting discussion. And as Werner said, we are not Kelman experts in a comprehensive way, because we are just at the start, at the beginning of a deeper research about the impact of Kelman's work, for example, for peace research. For example, we started now at the Kelman Institute a project for evaluating the protocols of his workshops. We have 2,500 pages of his workshop protocols. And we have Oliver Fink, who started his post PhD research on this topic. Yeah. But Christa, the question is about this Max question, social psychology and international relations. You remember the last 2 weeks ago, the lecture with Christopher Mitchell. Christopher Mitchell told us about the revolution of behaviorism in the field of international relations. I have to say, I don't know enough about it, and I have to study it more in detail. But this kind of behavioral turn in international relations after the Second World War in the 50s and so was a large school of very different sub-schools, from the right to the left, from the positivists to the critical theory. So this was a very broad field. But I think the main thing was the search of a new empirism. How can we work empirically? How can we do social research? International relations at the beginning, in the first years of the last century, was very, very, very idealistic. And when it comes to the human rights movement, so important it is, it's very idealistic. And therefore, you have the social psychologists. They see themselves as empirical researchers, nearly positivists, yeah, and they try to overcome or to integrate idealism with more realism. And I think this is behind this debate about social psychology, empirical research, and idealism in international relations.
Mm-hmm.
For example, this method of talking, how to resolve problems via dialogue, this is a kind of research method. It's called participatory action research. You know, you have then your protocols based on this dialogue where you can find hypotheses. You try to find hypotheses together with conflict parties. So this is a kind of empiric research. But behind this empirism, there is always the question of worldviews. Are we idealists? Are we realists? What are we? And Wolfgang, you said human rights and human dignity. And I think this is a triangle: human needs, human rights, human dignity. Human dignity has a kind of spiritual background, I would say, a very important personal spiritual background. Human rights is very much linked to values, to principles that we have to enforce. Human needs is more psychological, opening a debate, a dialogue. What is really important for you, for me? So these are this is a family, but they have different methodologies, dialogue, principles, you know? So this is how I see them. And it's very important to integrate maybe these three concepts, these three tribes, you know? For example, I don't know what I want to say, but we have to integrate them by finding a deeper underlying joint value, framework of values, for example. There you can find, for example, Christian concepts of human rights with Islamic values to keep this dialogue open, for example, you know? So you need a underlying, these three concepts, these three methods need an underlying framework. I would say again, a framework, a philosophy, not only theoretical, but also philosophical framework, allowing to talk to each other basis on the basis of completely different worldviews. And then a second point to what you said, Wolfgang, complexity. You said complexity is very important, but then we need, again, reductionism in order to become, that we can start to act, you know? And there is a difference between the classical complexity theory based on a lot of mathematical models, Kybernetics, and so on, and the complexity thinking or the complexity philosophy of Edgar Morin as a philosopher. Because he says there are two different kinds of complexity theories. This mathematic-oriented complexity theories and complexity as a philosophy, meaning that the world as such is so complex, is indefinitely complex, so that we cannot trust completely into religion, for example, for reductionism, but also not into science for reductionism. We have to live with complexity. There is always still something what is complex, what is completely uncertain, what is completely secret. There is a mystery. And we are dealing not only with science and with religion and with values, but also with the mystery of life and the mystery of the complexity of life. This means then, I would say this means to become very, very, very humble in your interventions in the field as a so-called conflict mediator, as all kinds of conflict interventions. This is a completely different geist, spirit. As we started in the 60s and the 70s with Johann Galtung, we know exactly what is the You know, what are the right concepts? What is the way? It's more a post-Leninist way to peace, you know? In complexity, philosophy is on the contrary, the contrary of it. Is very much linked with reflecting about yourself and about your relationship with the conflict parties. And you see, so for me, this complexity was a kind of liberation from the Kinderkrankheiten of former critical peace research.
Mm. Let me add some words, and excuse me, Hans Volker, that I will finish this point. I think because there was also discussed about behaviorism, and I once asked Herb Kelman about his attachment to behaviorism, and he said, okay, yeah, I was educated in this school, but I was never any behaviorist in the strict sense, because he was always much interested in the reality of the facts and then the outcomes, and not in the theoretical theories, if you want. He was not dogmatic. And since, as Wilfried has said, as also my background, I came from a dogmatic youth with principles, ideologies, and concepts. And it seems that Kelman, who has studied at the beginning languages and Jewish studies before he became a psychologist, this prevented him in some way to be too dogmatic. And to complexity, I will only add one phrase. Morin speaks about simple and complex complexity. And the simple idea of complexity is, okay, the world is very complex. We cannot see it, how it really works. But listen, with a supercomputer, we could consider all facts, and then we could find a simplification. And Morin said, wrong. The complexity consists not only in the number, in the sheer number of different aspects to consider, but in the interaction of all these factors. And this is not previsible. You cannot see this, and you cannot know it before. And you have to study it in every new moment, so you can only expect one thing. Set what you do not expect. This is what you can expect. And complex, you have to consider this kind of, let's say, a higher complexity. And this was also in some way true for Herb Kelman. And this is why he didn't believe in philosophy theories and so on, but he believed in observing the situation. And this was he was also a real model for observing the others and listening to the others in the interactive problem workshops. So the circle comes together here, from his theory to his practice. So thank you, and please, Hans Volker, thank you for waiting so long.
Hello, I am a student at the Karl Franzens University of Graz. And I would like to refer to the remark of Wilfried Graf about joint transdisciplinary approach. I'm very much interested in this approach. I'm looking for a long time for this approach. And I have found, for me, the best solution. It's the American Army. It's a thing like this. You have here 6 disciplines, one over the other, and it's a kind of first reduction of complexity, because you can first work in the field of military, then you can work in the field of political or economic. And after this reduction of complexity, you must, of course, enhance the complexity again, and you will then have the link between the military and the economic or the psychological aspects. this is 40 years, based on 40 years experience, and is a NATO standard. This means the military works with it, and the military can understand it. This means, I think we need sometimes the military, if we look for a window for opportunity, then they must understand, we must understand their thinking. And the windows of opportunity are very short normally, I think. Another way to make a sketch of this is this here, is the political, is the top layer, and then it goes military, economic, and so on. And if you make here in the first layer, the highest layer, the point, and then we'll see what's the power of this political point. And then you can see this power depends on the lower layers. Therefore you have pyramids of power, and then you compare them one another. I would say this. It's a main point. I feel this is also the part where the wars are going on. Therefore, the military is doing this. It's also attacked in the political warfare. The political warfare is the time before the war starts. And if you have after the war, then maybe a power sharing agreement. It's a good rule that you have all these power sharing arguments in different layers to make it more sure. Therefore, I would propose this. Of course, you have the time domain included, and the physical domain also included, this environment and so on. And maybe you don't find directly maybe the money flow, find not the money flow area, it's in the economic. And very important areas also the legal, but you will find it maybe in the political area. Okay, thank you. Hey, I will add something here. This is based on this. They had stability assessment framework quick reference guide. This means on this layer systems, they assess how much is stability. And the stability is here on many things. On one side, you can enhance the resilience, the strong part of the society, of the political parties. And on the other side, there are the pressures from social problems, for instance. And then you have a tipping point and you can go on. I think the stability assessment framework is a very good source we should look at. Okay, thank you.
Werner, do you want to respond directly, or Wilfried?
I think Wilfried will also respond, and so I will respond after him.
Okay.
So, Herr Fritsche, this is very interesting. Of course, I know such models, systemic models, but also from our discussions with the military guys, you know, when I worked in Schleining, there was often seminars together with military people. They are engaged in strategic research and strategic Risikobild Erstellung. Yeah, so I know these discussions a little bit. But I would be very glad if you could send me maybe one of these literature or models or visualizations. I like this very much. Maybe we could also find a way to have a Zoom call and to talk a little bit more when I come to Graz to have more deeper exchange about this. In general, I think we can always learn from the military strategic thinking. Of course, in my point of view, I think it's reductionist thinking, but and therefore I need a more complex approach, I would assume. But you can always learn what they know. They know how to go into the shoes to set themselves into the shoes of the others. when they don't do this, they have to think about, they have to try to understand the enemy. They have to be Putin-Versteher. They cannot go into a war with, Nadia will know, the military has to study the enemy, but also as a peace activist, as a peace researcher, as a conflict researcher, you can and you have to try to analyze, at least analytically, the other side. But this in our times is very, 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 very difficult, It's more or less not allowed anymore to think complex. So in our seminars, we have different between so-called peace logic and the security logic. And I would also, in the discussion with such models with the military strategic analysts, we are trying to defer peace logic versus security logic, but this is too far for now, for the moment, for here.
Okay.
I will see you.
Are you working on this in a PhD, or do you have a specific topic what you are following now, or?
I am for my total life, I'm interested in peace research, and this especially in stability, and therefore I am looking all the years already for things like this. And now I'm at the university. I'm retired already, and I have time to be at the university. Today I was with Maximilian Lakic in his presentation. It was very interesting, and so on. But I have time, and I'm very interested, and I do a private study about this, and I can send you some information about you.
Okay, welcome to the club. I'm also retired.
Okay, so since I'm also retired, maybe I have the right to continue. I mean, if it comes to the reduction of complexity, I always say, okay, but maybe not so fast. Sometimes it is necessary to extend the complexity in order to understand the situation. And if you go too quickly to reduction of complexity, then maybe you cannot, you have no chance to solve a conflict. In some ways, a conflict escalation spiral can be described as a permanent reduction of complexity into a murderous kind of simplicity. Yeah? If you know these gradual steps of escalation, this is exactly decomplexification of the situation. This is very dangerous in some way. And of course, in a very general way, you can say military solutions of a conflict are a kind of systematic reduction of complexity because it seems it goes quicker, it is more efficient in some way, but it can also be more deadly. And at the end, the outcome is something that proves that complexity, you should have had taken tribute to the complexity and to look for slower, more difficult solutions, but efficient and long-lasting solutions. So this is principally. And of course, I couldn't, your slides that you have shown, I couldn't really see them and study them, but one of them I saw, there were arrows, and all arrows were top down. So, and for me, this is a kind of strategy to influence somebody. At the end was, I guess, population over there. Okay, but this is not an example of complexity, population, but it is how somebody in power has a strategy to influence. But you have no feedback you have only this going top down and nothing bottom up. So this is not an example of complexity. But of course, I cannot read this, and we
Yes,
cannot go into detail. But this
I
was
was-
my first.
Yes.
It struck me. Yeah.
I worked 24 years in cybernetics subfield, and I really know what feedback is. Therefore, I'm really an expert for feedback. A fan of feedback. And
Okay.
for me, I would also like to refer to a remark from Werner. I heard 2 years ago, he cited, im Krieg stirbt zuerst die Wahrheit und als zweites stirbt die Komplexität. And this is very, very good. And for me, exactly this model is a way to enhance the complexity again, because in reality, it's not a dying of complexity. It's a fight about complexity. One side has one very simple approach, the other side has the other simple approach. But to find the truth, you must really see what is the system. The total system may be like this. And therefore, this is a way to regain complexity.
Thank you. Nadia?
Yes, first of all, I would love to thank you for this really interesting and inspiring report, and also for sharing your knowledge. Yeah, and when I'm kind of in contact with your like huge this knowledge base, I realize how little I know about generally social psychology and the world. But I want to share, I don't know, I was sitting and thinking, should I share this or not? But I decided to share like my thoughts. When Wilfried was talking about like his view of general life and these models, he said that there is always a mystery of life which we will never understand. So something kind of behind our schemes and small models, so they never catch like the whole picture. And right now I started field interviews at the Ukrainian Society, like just started my research, and there is an interesting idea which people share, and I wanted to share with you. Maybe you will get some comments or feedbacks regarding this. So when this invasion started at 2022, like there was Ukrainian society who were kind of fighters of light and goodness, good angels, and they are fighting against evil, like collective evil. A kind of Russia was associated with collective evil, but right now it kind of the situation has changed. And right now, inside the Ukrainian society, such a picture observed, like society was divided with the government, and right now government kind of reflects the same evil. So if we look like a kind of energy flow, at the beginning, this energy was only at Russia, but now this energy transited somehow into the Ukrainian society. And right now, what people say that at the beginning, they were fighting with the external enemy, and right now they should fight with this internal enemy and with the external one. So, and I don't know this, I'm just observing it as a phenomenon, and it would be curious for me if you have some thoughts. Why is it so? Why this operates into society? So what is this behind? What is the reason behind why this is changing?
Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate this a little bit more? And who's the internal enemy? Is this helper of the external enemy, or is he on the place of the former external enemy, or what exactly is the internal enemy now?
They say that right now the internal enemy is the government, which accepts a law which limit people rights, human rights, and so on. So right now, like regular citizens are fighting with the government of the country, which should, as they say, it should protect us. But right now I see a kind of, like, the energy is the same. This some people say that it's the energy of Soviet Union, which does not respect humanity. It's how they describe a kind of this feeling. It does not respect humanity. It limits my human rights. It does not respect, or it's also to the topic about dignity, no respect to my dignity. I'm not respected at all. And I'm just a kind of part of this mechanism which should operate somehow. I'm just a little part, and there is no this like no one respects my human soul or my wishes. It doesn't matter at all.
Do you have some hypotheses why is but because you said this is not that you're speaking about other people than 2 years ago, but it's a change in the society. And do you have a thesis why this happened? I guess you have some.
Well, I have just ideas. It's just research I have started. So, and this is actually, this question is very interesting for me. And I suppose, well, at least as I know, no one knows why is it so. And for sure it should be studied. And I have, it's just my guesstimate, that it's a kind of inheritage of the system of Soviet Union. So if we take Soviet Union as a machine, it operated somehow. And after Soviet Union was split into separate countries, anyway, each of these countries, it inherited some mechanisms. Okay, in Russia, it is, they operate more strictly. In Ukraine, before the war, they did not operate so strictly. But anyway, when crisis appear, like war, it's a huge crisis for the society. This mechanism, it is a kind of, I don't know, machine or structure up the society, which helps, from one side, it helps the society to operate, because these are some rules which people should correspond to. And this way, this like structure operates and moves somehow to their goals. I don't know if you know, when there was Soviet Union, there were this, we should make a plan in 5 years. There were strict plans and all people should correspond to these plans. So it was a plan-based system, and it worked. And everyone were a kind of working for government, and the government first before the human. It's at least what my parents share, because they grew and they spent all their life in the Soviet Union. So, and for now, kind of, you live in more Western society, and in Western society, as you discussed, human rights more respected, human dignity, so personality, something like humane, I would say. And this system, it limits strongly this humane part. At least it's how I feel it. And for now, it's also my guesstimate. I suppose it is time for the end of the system generally on a planet. Like this more strict and direct system. For now, planet experiences its transition to the new stage, where like humans will be more free. We are more free. Move from country to country, we can interact with other societies. So the society, the population of the earth is changing. And of course, our values also should change together with this transformation. Well, that's how I see it.
you have one explanation. I give you four more explanations if you want. But of course, I do not pretend that these four explanations explain it all. They are only hypotheses and they can be together. And they are only a part of the whole explanation. The first one is the difference between 2022 and 24 is not so big as you believe, because already before there was a gap in society, and a huge gap. Think on Donbass, for instance, but Donbass is also in the West in some way. I mean, another thinking, and so. Of course, Russian aggression for a moment could make forget all these differences in society for a moment. This happens always. This happened, for instance, in World War I in Austria, in Germany, when all people were, for a very short, not all people, but many people, for a short moment behind the leaders, the emperor, and so on. This is typical reaction. Yeah. Could be a little part of the explanation. So it was never without scissions and so. Second one, of course, the government has promised victory, and relative, not easy victory, but victory. And people see now there is no victory, and there is so much suffering. And they are asking, why do we have so much suffering? And of course, you can blame, and you have to blame the Russians, but in some ways they blame also their own side, because they are not able to protect them efficiently. And of course, the government is blaming the West because they do not deliver enough weapons and so on. And for a while this worked, but now they are blaming also their own government. So could be a promise that didn't work in some way. Yeah. The third, or maybe almost the same, is that people, when they see that their personal situation is getting worse, they like to blame other people. This is a normal mechanism. Yeah? Not only in war times. Yeah? This is in Austria, you can see it every day. People are not discussing their own situation, but they are saying, yeah. And the fourth point is that maybe some people among them think, okay, I have understood that war is not the answer to the aggression. We have to find other ways to defend ourselves, and we have maybe to accept that it takes a long time for negotiations to get the country back that is occupied by Russians, and we have to look for absolutely different strategy. And I do not believe that this number 4 explanation applies for all these people, but since I know some voices, and I knew them in Ukraine thinking this number 4, and I knew them from 2022. Maybe these voices are now a little bit louder. I don't know. This could be also an explanation. So definitely this is not enough, but it is also a part of the explanation, hopefully.
Thank you, Werner. I would also have 2 more questions, but I'd ask you to answer them in 1 or 2 minutes, or just leave them open.
It's
I
time
think that
to stop.
I think that one of the underlying themes we addressed during the last sessions and this one is this question that Kelman was dealing with within his papers. He was always writing about changing the microsystem via his workshops, and then by changing the microsystem, also changing the macrosystem, and as you framed it today, changing probably even the world system of a conflict. So one of the major issues of problem solving and interactive conflict transformation is how do we transfer insights gained at the micro level to the macro level and the overall system, and how can we trace these changes? This is one of the issues that we have to deal with. My second question brings us back to the beginning of this lecture. I saw that you consider yourself being not only a scholar practitioner, but also being a scholar activist. And as you described Kelman, he was also a kind of an activist and a scholar at the same time. But how does these two go together? I mean, it's already a challenge for us to be a scholar and a practitioner at the same time if we try to do research on the interventions that we conduct ourselves. And how can we be activists at the same time? Don't we have to be neutral, or do we have to be activists in peace and conflict research? So your position on this would be very interesting for me. Thank you.
I start with the second point. I think for me it's easy, and I guess for Kelman, this is one of the parallel. I didn't expect that I have parallel in my life with him, but in some way it is easy because Kelman started to be an activist before he became a scholar. And he became a scholar because he wanted to make a more substantial contribution to his ideals, to a new society than he could do as an activist. And for me, it was the same. I was an activist long before I became a scholar. And I guess I was before a teacher practitioner or teacher activist before I became a scholar practitioner. Yeah. So, and if you're on this way, there is no need to give it up in your life. And in some way, when Kelman went to Palestine and talking to Arafat and talking to the enemy in some way, this was a kind of activism also. It has, of course, purposes for his work and for his practice, but it is also a kind of activism, definitely. Yeah. So, and the first one, okay, I can follow Wilfried, who said you should continue with your lecture series. The second, so this question, how to come from micro to macro, is very good for case studies and theory for another lecture. By the way, I have also other ideas about lectures, but this one would also be good because this is, first, this is theoretically a very complex thing. And second, the outcome depends on the political power relations. And it's in any case study different. And sometimes you see it works and sometimes not. In my life, I have experienced only, I guess, one example when starting in the microsystem became a success at the macro system. This was to stop the nuclear power plant in Zwentendorf in Austria. And so Austria is since today nuclear free. Yeah, but all other approaches of civil society failed, or let's say had not enough success so far, or had too small successes. Yeah. So that's because you said I should be very short. I'm short.
Thank you very much. Wilfried, also very short, please. Unmute your mic.
Still 3 minutes? No, the first question, Jürgen, is how to bring the results, the thrust from the micro group, from the workshop into the outer world, I think this is now more and more difficult. For example, what we can see in Israel and Palestine, Herb could still work with people in a workshop from both sides. Now, today, this is completely not possible. Same, very difficult in Ukraine and Russia. So we have to find new forms for this. And one way we try to do it now is to find not only people they can, in such workshops, they can influence the decision makers, but people, they are politicians themselves, young politicians, people with a long-term project. I will become a director of the television. I will become a chief chef-redacteur. Chef-redacteur, what does this mean in English? The director of a media house. I would go into the parliament and so on. And with this long-term process to change the world, but always with this, your people, your network behind you for reflection, for self-critique and so on. And the second question is, I think we need a division of labor between all these different roles. You're an activist, you're a researcher, you're a scholar, you're a human rights activist, there are a lot of ways to do peace, to make peace, maybe 10 or 12 different functions. And you all have them in your inner world. And at the same time, you deal with such people in different functions in the outer world. And a lot of contradictions coming up. For example, when you're an activist, you sometimes have contradictions with these people, they think only in their theories. Or when you're sometimes I hate activists, I have to say, because they are so much linked to simplistic thinking that I really get angry with them. So how to deal with this inner and outer contradictions? This is what the peace movement and the peace research movement has to learn, because we are not good in this. And this is some partial, very, very painful situations and constellations what we are in now, especially now. Especially in Germany and in Austria, beyond the conflict zones, the direct conflict zones. Yeah, so division of labor in the inner and the outer world. For example, when I'm a mediator, I cannot in the same time be a critic of the war of the enemy, no? I cannot be, so I have to deal with solidarity work and mediation work. It's not the same. They have to have a different logic.
Thank you, Wilfried. This is homework for all of us, I think.
Okay.
And we've learned a lot about today about the complexity of conflicts and the role of social psychology to, on the one hand, raise complexity, but also reduce complexity to make it manageable for us. And we brought together multiple perspectives and disciplines to kind of develop Kelman's approach further also. And this will also be the content of the next session, which will be a lecture by Tamara Pearson-Distré, and she will talk about the identity paradoxes of reconciliation. And this lecture will be discussed by Lucine Karatian, who is a professor at Yerevan State University and will bring in another perspective from another current conflict. So see you next time. Until then, have a nice week, and thank you for your contributions today. Thank you very much.